welcome to today's book launch. Also, thank you for joining us to celebrate mentoring and coaching and, the very important job that mentors and coaches have to develop others in their context. And we're really delighted to share with you the book and also to share the work of the contributors to the book as well. So really, really exciting for us to be at this stage on the journey. Derek, over to you.
Yeah, good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. This book was a project that sort of grew out of joint working, which I've sort of worked with Lizana on and off for about 8, 9, 10 years now, and we're both having a shared passion for mentoring and coaching to help teachers within their career journeys. And one of the things that they were quite keen to do was this to be a practical book, which is usable for people either if they're on a traditional sort of promotional type course like an MPQL or those sorts of courses, but also for those people who are sort of fallen into a role where they've got to look after talent within an organisation. We frame this within, over the last couple of years, there's been a number of key things coming from particularly from the Department for Education, and we wanted to help teachers and those looking after teachers to help them navigate how to retain and develop that talent. So we've got obviously big challenges in terms of teacher retention, about retaining talent within organisations. My own background, I currently run a SCIT, a school-centred initial teacher training provider, and I wanted quite selfishly to ensure that the talent which we bring through at the very start of their career, we look after them, we retain them, we help to develop them, and we equip people with the tools to develop that talent, whether they're trainee teachers, new middle leaders, new senior leaders, head teachers. We've put this within, we've obviously got the teacher retention strategy, we've got the early career framework, we've got the reformulated national professional qualifications. But we saw that there was a bit of a gap with the MPQs in particular, and there wasn't a detailed focus, particularly around mentoring to retain talent within organisations. It was quite a structured way in which we can develop people, but not so much to develop teams of people. And if we can promote mentoring and coaching within education, because that's going to be central to retention of talent within our schools, within our trusts, etc. There is lots of information out there about mentoring and coaching from a business point of view. There are people with varying interpretations of what mentoring and coaching entail, and so we wanted to give the research informed background to why these things and these approaches which we suggest worked. But we wanted it not to be an academic book. We wanted to be something that busy teachers and people working within education could pick up, but also have enough depth for those who are undertaking, say, master's level qualifications, could use it as a primer, as a grounding to drive their thoughts forward.
Thanks, Derek. I think for us, we quite like the term academia. So it's that space where theory and practice fuse, and we know how the theory needs to translate into practice. So we wanted this book to be, evidence informed, but also to give people really clear approaches to develop mentors and coaches to enable others. And I think, Derek, it's true to say that the book is very much a book that we were hoping to have when we did similar work in our context, and there wasn't, a book to draw on specifically then with this in mind. And I think that's been the inspiration very much to the work that we hoped to do and then ended up doing. So who's this book for? It is for coaches and mentors in schools, but also for anyone who's interested in coaching and mentoring. And I think, as Derek was saying, the key for us was also to be clear on what does it mean to mentor and what does it mean to coach, and then also to think when to mentor and when to coach. because that's really important to understand, because often when we go to organizations, we learn that mentoring and coaching is used quite interchangeably. And for us, the underpinning here is this understanding the needs of the person you work with to enable you to then know how do we take them by the hand, or how do we frame that conversation to enable them to unlock their potential. So it was really key for us to get that across. Anything else you want to add, Derek?
Picking up what you've just said, this is the book I wish I'd had when I became a new head of department. I became a new middle leader, a new senior leader, because there's this expectation you grow people into a role, and then they have 6 months to try and straighten their understanding out. And the people above you sometimes are very good at leading, but not that good at coaching or mentoring people new into role. And that's one of the things we wanted, something that somebody could pick up and going, oh, I've got a new head of department joining my team. They're coming from inside the organization. What sort of strategies can I use? If they're coming from outside the organization, what strategies can I use? So we wanted something that was going to be practical and was something which will give busy people a hook into how can I best look after the people that I'm responsible for.
And in a way, we've also tried to provide a toolkit for people to look at every stage of someone's career, where we have helpful guidance, helpful checklists, but also then helpful reading lists that we hope will help people then to take that journey further, so that they can deepen their understanding of coaching and mentoring. And you will notice Jill very kindly read the book over the Christmas period, and she tweeted some wonderful snippets from the book, and also shared some of the resources there as well. But that was very much the intention, to give people a go-to toolkit in a sense as well, to help them to unpack, that journey further. And so for us, it was really, as I've said, important to define what is coaching and what is mentoring, and that we've done in the very beginning of the book, to really get those boundaries set out very clearly, to then enable people to understand that it's very much about judging the needs of that person you're working with, and to gauge that, to enable you then to connect with them and to provide the support that they need to unlock their potential, or to enable them to learn. And I do like the definition by Connor and Pecora. They talk about coaching and mentoring as learning relationships. And I think that in education, we need to move away from perhaps coaching and mentoring just being for people who develop in the beginning of their career, or at a point where things are tricky, but actually it needs to be part of your developmental toolkit to have a coach and to have a mentor, and to be able to have those learning relationships with them, to be collaborative and to engage with them, to discuss teaching and learning practice, to discuss your own journey. And I think often that is something we don't necessarily do as well. And some of the research indicates that only 23% of us really talk about teaching and learning with each other, and the rest of the time we don't. And I think coaching and mentoring would be a wonderful bridge for us into reflecting on our practice, to become reflexive practitioners, to enable us to move forward, and also then to have the support in place to enable us to fully understand what's happened in our classrooms, and then to refine our practice to make sure we do the best for the children we look after. Anything else, Derek?
No, I think you've summed it up beautifully. Thank you very much.
Okay. And do you just want to talk us through just the thinking around each chapter and how we really map that?
Yeah, so we looked at the stages in which somebody, like the sort of the steps on the staircase or the ladder, which we ended up on the cover with. And it's a way in which we wanted people to be able to reflect about how they can approach working with people at different stages in their career, but also have it throughout each chapter at appropriate points to have reflection type questions, where it gives an opportunity for the reader to stop and be able to consider and reflect and apply their own context within the structures which we were talking about and the approaches which we're talking about. And recognition, I looked through a lot of the chapters where the approach is, there isn't a one size fits all approach, and it's a way in which it really depends on the culture of the organization. It depends upon the person that you are working with, you are supporting, whether they have a long-standing understanding of that culture, and whether there's any tensions between your understanding of the culture and their understanding of the culture within the school as well. We also then wanted to look at and provide advice and guidance and pointers for people due to unique characteristics as well. So that's why we included chapters particularly, and they're co-written around supporting women through mentoring and coaching, also those from the global majority groups as well, because there wasn't much contextual guidance and information for those groups within published literature and published books. There aren't that many books out there about mentoring and coaching education to start with, which is why we wanted to write the book. And it is written within the English context, but the work within the book can be applied into other contexts as well.
Absolutely. I think we were quite careful. We didn't want to hook it onto a particular policy change or policy directive, because we wanted it to be a book that has sort of longevity, and that offers principles in coaching and mentoring, rather than it being particularly attached to a particular policy driver at that point in time. It was inspired by some of the changes, but we felt that there's more mileage in the book as it's set out in terms of then, each stage of the career. And I think that, as Derek was saying, it's really important to us also to reflect on how women are supported in education. And as you probably would hear later on from Vivian Porrid, we really wanted to amplify some of the work that Womenate's doing in that field as well. And then, of course, colleagues from global majority groups, we are looking at the BAMET supports that's offered to mentors and coaches. And we will hear a little bit from Amjad later on too, in terms of the work he's doing, as well as Krupa Patel. So we try to look at it in a broader sense. And of course, there are many avenues that we could still explore, and they have been underexplored and haven't been explored in enough depth yet, in terms of potential things like mentoring new governors, etc. But those are things that we can always circle back to later on. But we try to provide a broad sort of outline in terms of that sense of the golden thread running through someone's career. And we probably come back to some of those other particular themes later on as things progress and move forward. And then our key message is really, in terms of this, is really to reflect on teachers' professional learning journey and how coaching and mentoring can support with that. And I quite like the phrase professional learner, to see yourself as a professional learner who engages with lifelong learning and working in a learning relationship with a coach and a mentor. It's more common in business to actually approach a mentor and say, could you help me to progress on my career journey? And I think that we can learn from that and really work with mentors and coaches to equip us and also to develop us. And as Derek and I know, we've both benefited from fabulous mentors all throughout our career, and some of them were formal and some of them were informal, but I think more can be done in that sense to develop a culture of mentoring and coaching right across education in that sense. Derek, anything else?
One of the key things we want to do is to have some voices from people within the educational sector at different stages. That's why we've have a number of case studies throughout to look at when did mentoring and coaching make that key change or enable that change within somebody's career and somebody's approaches. And this is why we thought it was important to have a wide range of case studies within the book, so that it gives an opportunity for people to identify with the challenges and opportunities which people have at different times in their careers as well.
Going to carry on.
Yep. So in terms of the reflective questions, we put those in as an opportunity so that it's not a book that you read passively. It's a book which you read and you engage with, and the use of sort of scenario-based learning or dilemma coaching, how we want to look at it, it gives an opportunity for people to critically reflect on their practice, and also to consider what are the impacting factors, but within their context. So rather than it being an abstract set of these are ideas which you might want to, now let's think in your context. And one of the things we're working alongside is a workbook to go alongside the book, and also we're looking at podcasts and other support materials as well, which are underway at the moment.
Yeah. And that will also be available on the Bloomsbury website for you to access once you have your book. Now, I think what's really exciting here is also we didn't subscribe to any particular mentor model. And there's a particular reason for that, because again, as Eric was saying, there's no one size fits all when you work with people, and it's about understanding the need of that person. So as you work with that person, and you decide whether you're going to move on the continuum of coaching and mentoring, thinking whether you should mentor or coach, you also need to think which one of these tools might be most useful to help to frame that learning conversation. And that is why it's important not to hold on to one particular model, because I think sometimes it works for one person, but it doesn't necessarily work for someone else. And it's really important as a coach to continue to grow, or a mentor, to understand the full repertoire of what's available to you, to enable you to really hone in on that person's needs to help them to grow and develop. It's a similar concept if you think about it when we are in the classroom, when we work with children. Every child learns differently, and every child accesses information differently. The same is true of adults. And that is why we wanted to provide a toolkit rather than just advocate one particular model or one particular approach. It's very much understanding how you need to work with that person best to get the best out of them and to help them to fulfill what their goals, their targets, and also their needs. And I think for us, that was really important. Anything to add, Eric, before I move on to discussion?
Yeah, that flexibility in approaches and having that range of approaches which actually meets the known and emerging needs of the person you're working with has echoes through my own organisation, where the way in which we work with our trainee teachers is as they develop in confidence and competence with different particular aspects of their practice. You may be working with a trainee teacher, some aspects of their practice you're using more mentoring approaches. As they're developing more confidence, you're then sort of working alongside them in more of a coaching opportunity. And our placement mentors that we work with, we give our placement mentors the flexibility and autonomy to respect in the situation, in that moment, what is the most appropriate way to work with that training teacher. And also those who then move on to become ECT mentors as that trainee is employed within that school. You are building up that longitudinal relationship, and you are then building up a mutual understanding of how you work.
Absolutely. And I think that, just building on what you're saying there, Eric, from my own doctoral research, I've learned that when you develop your coaches and your mentors, it's really important to know where you're at with your coachees and mentees' learning journey and their trajectory, and then also understand where your coaches and mentors are to enable them to then know what the next step is in terms of their development and training. I don't think it's as simple as writing courses. It's sometimes about gauging where you're at to enable you to flex in that program to provide something that'll take them to the next step. And I think it needs to be responsive to the needs as well. So it's about building that repertoire, it's layering the knowledge, and also exposing people to different toolkits and different tools that they can use to help a person to move on. But to do that, you need to be really skilled as a coach and as a mentor, and you also need to hone in on the need of that person. It's not about a performative approach or filling in paperwork. It's very much about understanding how people learn, and in particular then how adults learn, to help them to move their learning on. And I think that's the key thing for me when it comes to coaching and mentoring. It is about unpacking and developing the learning of adults. And it's a really, really huge privilege to do that, but it's also a fascinating journey, because I'm a mentor and a coach as well, and I learn from every person I work with, and that enriches that journey for me to really think, how can I do what's best for them in those conversations to enable them to solve issues, to drive goals, to meet the needs of the children they work with. So in essence, I think that's really the main message for us in terms of how the book also can be used, needs to be used, and hopefully can be helpful in a variety of different contexts. If there are no questions, I'm going to ask Derek to say something about his acknowledgement. If you have a copy of the book, or if you at some point come across it, you will notice that Derek acknowledges his father in the book. And I thought it was just nice to say something, and then I'll hand over to Joel to ask a question. Derek.
Yeah, thanks. I acknowledged two people in the front of the book. One was my dad, Alexander Joseph Boyle, and my first head teacher that promoted me to an assistant head teacher. So Steve Boyle was the head teacher at Hillview School for Girls when I was employed there as an assistant head, alongside two other colleagues, and he was both a wonderful boss to work for, but also incredibly frustrating, because as a busy assistant head, you'd sort of go in, you need to speak to him. There was this particular issue being sorted out that needed sorting out, and Steve would say, okay, just talk to me about it. And he goes, right, I'll come back to you with a solution. And at that point, you need to run off, you need to solve that problem. And Steve taught me that considered decision making and not responding when you're in that adrenaline fueled state was the key to good leadership. It's not being knee-jerk reactions in that point, to consider the facts. And working for him was a real pleasure, and sometimes a bit of a trying time. The other person that I acknowledge as a big influence is my dad. He left school at 14. He was a welder fabricator for Tilly and Stevens in Maidstone. He did steel erecting on a lot of the power stations around sort of the southeast, and he really instilled in myself and my sister, and also the grandchildren, about just do your best, just be kind, look after each other, and be interested in everybody's story and everybody's journey they're in, and you will learn from everybody that you come into contact with. And between those two key influences, it sort of shaped me into the person that I am today, that I take a real interest in the stories and the passions of the people I work with. I'm very lucky. I work with 50 to 60 new trainee teachers every year. And we're a relatively small organisation, so we do know every single person. I have a wonderful family of mentors that I work with, senior mentors, and one of my colleagues that I've worked with for 10 years is actually on the call today, so she knows the organisation that we're talking about, and it gives us an opportunity to learn from every single interaction which we have, and every single story that we learn from other people, because they help you to grow and learn as a leader, but also as a mentor and as a coach. Because it's not just the formal opportunities for mentoring and coaching, it's also the informal opportunities, those little conversations, which could be the right conversation which that person needed or you needed at that point. And we do a lot of stuff within our organization around developing critically reflective teachers, but also reflexive teachers, looking at the impact on yourself of the relationships that you have, whether they are positive or whether they are a negative type response. And you can only gauge and control your response to a situation. You can't control other people's responses within that situation. You can nudge, you can nurture, you can hopefully try and guide, but it's about seeing the best in people.
Yeah.
So
lovely. Thank you so much, Derek. I'm going to hand over to Jill. Thank you for being patient.
Just before I say what I was going to say, just listening to Derek, I wanted to share something which really resonated. One of the things that I do in this post-headship phase of my life is I do read quite a lot of education books, particularly books about leadership. That's my special passion. That would be my mastermind specialist subject. And I tweet from them in order to help publicize and just spread the word, tweet snippets so that people can see whether these are books that they might be interested in. And as well as your book, one of the other books I've read recently is this one, Right Kind of Wrong by Amy Edmondson, who is a Harvard professor, and she's the person who coined the phrase about psychological safety, which I think is mentioned in your book in the context of coaching and mentoring. And one of the chapters, she starts with this quotation from, well, it's attributed to Viktor Frankl. And when Derek was talking about kind of something that happens in your response to it, it reminded me of this. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And I absolutely agree with Derek that you can't make that choice for someone else. You can't actually direct their response. But I do think coaches and mentors can support and challenge in such a way that they encourage people to realize that your response doesn't have to be knee-jerk. It doesn't have to be automatic and just driven by emotion. You can take a beat and then consider how you move forward from that point. I find it such a powerful quotation. And what I was going to say, Lizana, why I raised my hand, I did read the whole book. I realized that for lots of people, probably dipping into whichever section they find most relevant to them at that stage of the journey is probably how they might choose to use it. But because I wanted to read it all, to tweet from it all, it was really interesting to look at the whole book, the whole journey. And I think the reason that I find, I know it's not called Twitter anymore, but I can't call it anything else. Yeah, the reason I find Twitter so useful is that it is social media. It's not just about broadcast, it's about connection, it's about dialogue, it's about discussion. And it was really interesting to see which of the things I tweeted from the book were picked up by other people. They were liked, people commented, people agreed, reinforced, sometimes challenged. And I wish more of us used Twitter in that way. Yeah. So social media, not just broadcast media. And that's what I wanted to say.
Absolutely. I thought I was following it obviously with interest myself, and I thought it almost reflected a learning conversation, didn't it? And,
yes.
And there was a real dialogue about what it meant to coach, what it meant to mentor, sometimes questions around the questions we used. And I thought it was really fascinating, and I agree with you. It could be actually a fabulous tool to use to help mentor informally as well, where people might have questions or might want to unravel things or demystify it. But I thought it was lovely how it took on its own life form in a sense.
Yeah, Twitter at its best. Twitter how we should be using it, I think.
You'll probably see throughout the book as you've read it, there's quite a bit on cognitive psychology built into the book, because that's one of my obsessions and interests as well, is really understanding how things land with people and how we need to think about the way we work with them to open up their learning, but also how we need to work with others to unlock that and to see the best in them. So that's been great. And I'm going to hand over to Alison in a second. I just want to mention, you will probably note that I have acknowledged Harry Dodds, who was my mentor at Oxford Brookes when I started in 2004 as a mentor. And I didn't actually acknowledge my whole family, but I acknowledged my father in my my doctoral submission, because of very specific reasons. So I chose to acknowledge different people at different points, but equally profound in their impact on my own journey as well. So I'm going to hand over to Alison with that in mind, because I know in her foreword, she also reflected on how mentors and coaches helped her to then navigate her journey moving forward. So over to you, Alison, and thank you so much for supporting us.
Well, thank you very much indeed. It's brilliant to be here, and actually just noting through the contributors to the book just how many contributors are also fellows of the Chartered College. So we're all on a kind of collegiate journey together, which is brilliant. When I was asked to write the foreword, I really reflected on what has coaching and mentoring meant to me throughout my career. And it strikes me that very differently from the way that new teachers are supported today. When I first went into teaching, when I first started teaching, my first teaching post was in a secondary school. I'd trained to teach as a primary teacher, and there weren't any jobs near where I lived. And so I got a job in a secondary school, and it was a job that was teaching general subjects across Key Stage 3. Because the governors, when I went for the interview, said, oh, well, if you're a primary teacher, you can teach anything, can't you? So there I was sort of hurled into, it felt like I was hurled into the experience of teaching in my first year. And I had no mentor. I had nobody formally or informally who was supporting me in that role. And the only sort of, we had to have, termly observations needed to be completed in order that you could complete your probationary year at that time. And so the deputy head would just sort of arrive in my classroom and kind of grunt at me and say, oh, very good, and disappear. And that would be it. So there was no professional learning during that time that was formal. I mean, there was a lot of professional learning in terms of just getting on with the job and trying to survive. But there was no formal mentoring. There was no support for me as an individual teacher. My support came from my mum, who was a head teacher herself. And she was the one who would kind of keep me going and urge me on when I felt like giving up, because there were times when I felt like giving up in that first year. It was incredibly tough. But I just contrast that with the experience that our colleagues have now, and have the opportunity, hopefully, to be supported much more formally through their early learning. The first time that I was really able to discuss my teaching and learning properly with other colleagues was when I did my master's degree. So I did a master's when I'd got our two daughters, and my youngest daughter was only sort of 18 months old. And then I'd taken a career break, and I was able to do my master's at Cambridge. Just one day a week, I would go to the university for sort of talking about anything other than babies and breastfeeding. It was heaven. And I would go there, and I would read lots and talk and, really kind of theorize about the business of teaching and learning. And I was so passionate about teaching, but also I was passionate about being a new mum. And so it was just a brilliant opportunity. I was studying early years in my master's, and it was wonderful to be able to kind of read about and see in front of my own eyes, the development of my children, and also the theory around early years and early years practice and so on. So being able to talk and reflect there with colleagues wasn't necessarily about my own individual practice, but it was about developing my thoughts and my ideas and what I believed in. And that was so powerful. And then when I went back to teaching, I was asked to be part of a research project. So I was asked to be part of the Learning Without Limits research project, the first study. And they said they really wanted to come and wanted to send researchers into my classroom to see what was going on. And that was, it was quite daunting, I have to say, because if you have a researcher in your classroom, you're constantly sort of thinking, what are they thinking about what I'm doing? How are they judging what I'm doing? And then they'd ask children to come out and interview them and interview my TA, and anyway, but the process involved sessions at the university, probably a couple of times a term, where we would be really kind of, it was a combination, I suppose it was mentoring, but it was also really trying to interrogate our practice, and they were feeding back what they thought they'd seen, and then kind of asking, you know, how did this feel in terms of, did it play well with us? Did it feel like it was legitimate? Did it feel like this is our teaching? Now that is such a privilege to ever be in that situation, and I really think it's so important. In fact, it's one of the reasons I now lead the Chartered College, because that notion of research being formative in terms of one's own practice is really powerful. And since I've written the foreword, since that time, just recently, I've been reading a doctoral thesis by Julia Flutter. I don't know if any of you know Julia, but Julia worked with Jean Ruddock. She worked with Robin Alexander. Most recently, she worked at the Chartered College, and then she left us to go and write this thesis. And she's written about the notion of phronesis, so the notion of intuitive wisdom combined with research wisdom, but through the lens of thinking about collegiality. And this is why I'm mentioning this now, because I think coaching and mentoring sits so powerfully within the notion of the profession as a collegiate profession. So being able to collaborate, to be able to learn from other colleagues, to be able to develop and refine your ideas. And in a way, that's exactly, Jill, that's exactly the attraction of Twitter as you describe it. It's because you're able to learn, but you're also, you know, you're developing your ideas while you're reflecting on statements that you make and things that other people say and things that you read and so on. But also what Julia's talking about in her doctorate is also about the notion that it's collegiate phronesis, but it's also about bound into a set of ethics. So it's not just any old thinking about teaching and learning, it's thinking about teaching and learning, practice and research, combining that, but within an ethical framework, if you like. And that really resonated strongly with me, because if you're being coached by somebody who has the same value system as you, if you're being mentored by somebody who has the same value system as you, I think that is far, far more powerful. And I guess sometimes where it goes wrong is maybe you're teamed up with somebody whose direction of travel is going over here, and you need to be going that way. And that's where stress comes from. So the combination of having somebody who listens really well, somebody who can advise, but also somebody who's on the same page as you in terms of what they think really matters. All of that has become much clearer to me just while I've been reading post-Christmas in my kind of newly refreshed phase where I can read things like doctorates without being too exhausted. So my foreword is really all about how does coaching and mentoring help one develop? And it's not just something for one's early career. I think it's career long, it's lifelong. It's about how you share your ideas, how you refine your ideas, how you debate things, how you articulate practice. And I think personally that's fascinating. And I think it's endlessly fascinating. When I was, when I became a head teacher, that research team that came in to observe while they were writing Learning Without Limits contacted me and said, well, now you've become a head teacher, you'll be running a school, won't you, that is not labelling children. And we would love to see how you're going to move this school from the special measures state which it was in, how you're going to move that school from special measures and do it without labelling children or adults. And I remember thinking, I haven't got a clue how I'm going to do that. And they said, can we come and be part of this? Can we come and research your practice? And I just remember thinking, don't say yes, don't say yes. And saying, actually, that would be fantastic. Why don't you come? Anyway, years later, so they were involved with the school for many years. And my mentor at that time, who I talk about in the foreword, was Mary Jane Drummond. And for those of you who know Mary Jane, she's a fiercely intelligent, hugely principled early years educator. And I was I was so fortunate, looking back, I was so fortunate to be mentored by Mary Jane. And I absolutely know that I was more worried about what Mary Jane thought of what was going on in the school than I ever was about what Ofsted thought. So Mary Jane's kind of goals for what would go on were way higher in terms of principle, practice, vision, you know. And so everything that I was doing, I was testing myself against Mary Jane and trying to come up to scratch. So when we had Ofsted, you know, that was, I'm not saying it was easy because it's never easy, but the goals were much lower in terms of what we were trying to do. They were already encompassed. And I just want to share with you some of the principles that mentoring enabled us to uncover, because it's so powerful, so much more powerful than ever being able to just reflect on your own. I think when you work with somebody closely and you talk about your practice and you share your ideas and you share what's happening, and then they reflect back to you and talk about, these are the things that I think we're seeing. So there were, these principles are the ones that she found. So she found a notion of openness. So openness to ideas, to possibilities, to surprise, as opposed to believing that there's one right way. Questioning, restlessness, humility, as opposed to relying on certainties and ready-made solutions. Inventiveness, so creative response to challenge, as opposed to compliance with imposed models and materials. Persistence, courage, humility, not settling for easy answers. Emotional stability, taking risks and resisting that fear of failure, that fear of trying new things. Generosity, welcoming difference, as opposed to deficit thinking and a desire for uniformity. And finally, empathy, a mutual sense of supportiveness, as opposed to fear, defensiveness, and blame. Those principles are really deep-rooted within my practice. They are at the heart of why I lead the Chartered College. They're at the heart of why I wanted to support Lizana and Derek's writing, collegiality, collaboration, refusing to accept easy answers, refusing to take a compliance model and say, that'll do, it's easy enough, let's just follow that. That's the restlessness that underpins my practice and my ethos. And I'm hugely grateful to Mary Jane as my mentor during that time for really surfacing those things. And it's been a privilege to share them with you this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Alison. I think we have all got the sense it's still morning, isn't it? But some really thought-provoking ideas here being shared. It's interesting to hear about Julia's PhD as well, because John Macklin and I have worked in a coaching model that's called phronesis, actually, which seems to align really well. So I'll have a little look at that. But I thought just to mention quickly, I know the Chartered College also does some fabulous work on developing coaches and mentors, and you have a great program. And of course, I was very lucky to also on the Chartered Routes be a mentor as well. So there's also loads of opportunities to be collegiate and collaborative at the college as well. So thank you so much for today and for joining us. It's a huge privilege. And I'm going to hand over to Yamina Bibi. And Yamina and I met in East London many years ago when she was very enthusiastic about coaching and working with us at BayMed. And since I've followed this fantastic journey of yours, Yamina. And I think what's really amazing is to see that you've moved on to deputy headship. And I think you've just completed your first week, haven't you?
I have.
And, and what a journey it's been. And thank you so much for joining us.
Hi everyone, I'm Yamina Bibi and I am just started my deputy headship role leading on behaviour and curriculum. But previous to that, I was an assistant head teacher leading teaching and learning. And I say previous, I mean literally just before Christmas. And where Lizana I met was through BayMed, but actually Lizana was one of our PGC mentors when I was a professional coordinating mentor working with the University of East London. So we worked really closely together and really supporting that professional learning of ECTs through mentoring and coaching is something that I'm really passionate about and really interested in. And this book is just such a is so welcome within the profession. So I want to say congratulations to you both, Lizana and Derek. It's such a fantastic book. I've already bought it, obviously, for our CPD library as well, because I think it's just so important. But the case study I contributed towards was around that professional learning for early career teachers, or when I wrote it, they were called NQTs, through that mentoring and coaching and really that importance. And I'm now about to start my 15th year, I think, but as a newly qualified teacher, as an ECT, I really valued the mentoring and coaching that I received from my amazing mentor, Teresa Dunseith. And if it wasn't for her, I probably would have left teaching, 2 years, probably less than that, into the profession. And I wouldn't be where I am right now without her. Why is it really important to support that professional learning for ECTs, and how might we do that? It's something I talk about in that case study, about the way in which I tried it when I was a professional coordinating mentor at Forest Gate Community School, leading on kind of the NQT or early career and ITT program. And I think one of the places we need to start is looking at that leadership of early career teachers and how we might do that. And I mentioned that in the case study about how we went about doing that at the school at the time. But really, that effective leadership mentoring starts by mentoring the mentors and mentoring the people who are overseeing the whole program. And with the ECF, it gives you that opportunity now to really have that kind of support as the lead mentor or the mentors within that profession, within our profession. One of the things that we did to really support mentors in their mentoring, but also support ECTs in ensuring they were getting a consistent kind of approach to that mentoring, was creating this almost like standardized and centralized mentor meeting agenda. And anyone who knows me knows I love things to be centralized. I promise it's not because I'm a control freak. It's more because ensuring that there's a really consistent approach to the way in which we mentor, because we know that with mentors being really busy, lots of them being full-time teachers, it can be really difficult to find the time, and it might sometimes mean that mentees don't get that really structured and focused conversation, and it might be a little bit ad hoc. By creating and providing that almost standardized and centralized mentor meeting agendas, we really focus that conversation, but also giving mentors flexibility to adapt. So it wasn't that we said you have to only talk about instructional coaching, or you can only talk about adaptive teaching for this session. It was really thinking, here's some ways in which you can really structure and focus that conversation, while also ensuring that mentors were able to adapt to the colleagues in front of them. Providing for mentees and the trainees kind of we called it the NQT file, but ultimately it was a reflective journal. And I studied at the Institute of Education, where I did my PGCE and my master's, and we had this reflective journal. And I thought really carefully as a PCM at the time about how we continue that conversation when we're in our first few years of teaching, to ensure that we're still being reflective. And it doesn't matter whether we're doing a master's or not, to continue that. And in school, we're professionals. How can we provide that? So in the case study, I talk about this NQT file to give mentors and mentees particularly the opportunity to kind of capture those successes and those learning points as well. And as part of that case study, and I think this is really important when we're thinking about mentoring and coaching, I think this is why I love the book that Lizana and Derek have written, is because it's about giving ECTs and their mentors time to read that relevant research. We're expecting our colleagues to be up to date with that subject-specific research, for example, without giving them the time. And we know what some may call, we're quite time poor in schools, or we claim to be, but I think part of that is because what are we really prioritizing? Are we prioritizing the development of our early career teachers, but also their mentors? So in that kind of standardized mentor meeting minutes agenda, they would have a weekly opportunity to read a bite-sized kind of relevant bit of research to do their subject, because I'm secondary based, with their mentors, and really kind of unpick that, and then get an opportunity to go and pop into other people's lessons to see that research in practice so that they can learn from it as well. Part of what I talk about in the case study is about how we train the mentors and in order to support the mentees. And part of that was about actually training them to be effective coaches. So we did, and we do use, even in my current school at Sarah Burnell, the T-Grow model. And I know Lizana and Derek were kind of steered away from really focusing on a particular kind of model. We use that T-Grow model again to provide that consistency, and we train all of our mentors in being coaches as well, so they can move between the main mentoring where it might be quite a bit more directive to that coaching where it's actually adapting to the mentee in front of them. And also we train the colleagues on giving that effective feedback, using the radical candor method from Kim Scott. So really that kind of caring personally and challenging directly to support our mentees and our ECTs as well. And in the case study, we'll talk about how mentors then can adapt based on their knowledge of coaching to the ECTs in front of them. So we're not just sticking to that really rigid mentoring directive approach, but actually while our ECTs and the ECTs in front of us are learning and developing and honing their practice, we are supporting them with more open dialogue, which I think coaching approach provides. But as part of that kind of case study, the key thing for me was, and particularly the reason why I was excited to contribute to the book, was because I think it's really important that we are talking about how we support our mentors as well as our mentees and our ECTs to really thrive. And some of you may know that I've recently written, I haven't finished it, but recently written a book about thriving your early career, early first years of teaching. And actually colleagues can only do that, and mentees can only do that when their mentors are given the opportunity to create those conditions and that environment. So with the case study, it was really meant to be one approach. It's not the only approach, and I think that's really important to say, but it's one approach that provides that central kind of leadership as the professional coordinator mentor. I think they're called now lead mentors, while also really supporting our early career teachers through Thrive, to support them, but also still be reading and researching and develop their own style, their own way in which they do it, and not kind of constricting them, which was really key part of that case study. And I loved doing that role because of that reason, because ultimately what we want is to support that retention and recruitment of our early career teachers, so that there's longevity in the profession and they don't just leave within 3 or 4 years because it's unsustainable. And my mentor provided that for me. It's why I'm still here, even though I thought I would never last past year 5, is because I've had that mentoring and coaching throughout my career, not just at the early career stage, but now as I've moved through. And I know later we've got Vivian talking and about Women Ed, and those of you who know me know that Women Ed has been integral and crucial to my leadership development. So I hope that's a real kind of whistle-stop tour of that case study, but also of that approach to mentoring and really supporting the professional learning of our early career teachers, so that they stay in the profession, they love what they do, and they continue to become the leaders and the next generation of leaders that we have in our schools.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Amina. And it's really lovely to see how you have really embedded your practice in your school. And I know from, working with you in your schools as well, how you provide resources and also those various conversations with your mentors. You literally are a mentor of mentors, and you take them by the hand through the journey, which I think is really powerful practice, and lovely to hear how you use your model as well, because that's really exactly what we want, is that sort of insights into how models are used and how they can really help unpack learning and learning conversations. So really appreciate you spending some time with us.